build and took the lives of more than 1 million people. The wall that failed to keep Britain and France out of China's market.
I'll take it from here, Petal. Hi, I'm Jen Green, and this is Crash Course World History. And today we're going to talk about China, specifically the military confrontations, the internal weaknesses, and the reform movement of China. Let's talk about how the rapid increases in productivity caused by industrial production influenced the British and French in their attempts to open up the Chinese market. First off, Britain introduced opium, a drug made out of poppy flowers, to China. Chinese became addicted and spent huge amounts of money on this drug, almost completely relying on Britain to supply it. Instead of being the supplier of luxury goods such as tea, porcelain, and silk, they now were paying silver for the items that they wanted. The British introduced opium, which because of how addicted it is, many places became dependent on it, and the British profited off of it. The Chinese responded to the development and spread of global capitalism by starting the Opium War, with the British as well as the new rebellions and reforms. These included a series of unequal treaties between the Chinese and Europeans, which guided Chinese relations with foreign states until 1943. Rebellions and reforms started to occur in China as the people became discontented with imperial rule. Let's go to the thought bubble. The rebellion started with the Taiping Rebellion, the Society of God Worshippers, a group formed by Hong Xiuquan that worked to merge Christianity and native religions, led the Taiping Rebellion, and they wanted the abolition of private property, creation of public education, and literacy for the masses. They also declared equality for men and women and had separate divisions of female and male soldiers. It was a hugely destructive rebellion which caused the debilitation of the Chinese Empire at the end of the 19th century because of increasing poverty and discontent of the Chinese peasantry. Thanks, Thought Bubble. After this rebellion, the government introduced the self-strengthening movement. This included the aristocrats. Stan, we talked about this. It's aristocrats, not aristocats. The aristocrats being permitted to raise troops, levy taxes, and run bureaucracies because of the imperial grants. They wanted to blend Chinese cultural traditions with the European industrial technology, although this did not introduce enough industry to bring real military and economic strength to China. And now it's time for the open letter. Let's see what we have in the secret compartment today. Look, a flower from Petal Weller. How thoughtful and punny. Stan? Now, time for an open letter to China from the British. Dear China, why won't you let us sell you opium? Your people were already introduced to it by the Arabs. We're just the ones supplying it now. I don't see the difference. We just want to buy your luxury goods such as porcelain and tea. We're trying to help your economy. What's the big deal? Best wishes, the British.
Alright, I'm going to interrupt you there, Jen. Industrial society was the goal, and Kong Yue and Liang Qichao had a plan to get it there. They started the 100 Days Reform with the goal of turning China into a modern industrial society. Empress Cixi, on the other hand, had a different agenda, and she abolished this. And by doing that, she kept control of the ruling house, making her the most influential woman in China's history.
Her political authority was questioned by the Chinese people, which contributed to the Boxer Rebellion along with the growing nationalism. The Chinese government started to work and communicate with foreigners, making the people feel like they needed to take matters into their own hands. They wanted to keep their culture purely Chinese. The Boxer Rebellion was a violent movement spearheaded by militia units calling themselves the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. The Boxers went on a rampage in northern China, killing foreigners and Chinese Christians, as well as Chinese who had ties to foreigners.
At this point, the British, along with other European nations, needed to rescue their citizens who were besieged by the Boxers. They created an international army with the intention to attack Beijing to free their people. Once they gained access to a fort, the Empress Cixi ordered that all foreigners should be killed. All the foreign ministers and their families were murdered. When the international army attacked Beijing and won, the Empress fled and negotiations were started to appease the foreign nations. Over 100,000 people were killed, most being Chinese Christian civilians. All of this because of the dissatisfaction of the Chinese people with their government.
The Chinese peasantry was upset with imperial rule and caused many different revolts and rebellions, including the Taiping Rebellion, which was very popular and gained a lot of support as it moved throughout China. But ultimately, it was defeated.
Okay, thanks, Petal. Let's move on to China's part in the growing global capitalism. To start, a major labor system used around the globe was the use of indentured servants. People from all different countries would go into the New World for a few years after signing a contract with a company. Indentured servants from southern China and India were known as coolies. Many of these people were illiterate and didn't know what they were signing, allowing companies to take advantage of them. And some would even go to work in factories in America, and even after their contract ended, many would stay there. China, during the Ming Dynasty, had closed their doors to outside influences, and they were still closed during the Manchu Dynasty. This was a leading factor in their downfall. They failed to realize that while they were focused on enhancing their own traditions and culture, the rest of the world was focused on advancements in technology and industrialization. This caused them to be far behind in other nations in regards to industrialization. The Taiping Rebellion caused the Chinese to rely on foreigners to help quell the rebellion. They became more open to Western influence, leading to problems that then caused the Opium Wars, which China lost due to their lack of advanced military weapons that the British had. China was coerced to sign an unfair treaty, the Treaty of Nanjing, which forced them to open ports to trade, and they lost a significant amount of their tributary states such as Korea, Vietnam, and Burma. There were large economic consequences due to the industrialization as well. The lower classes were hit hard because of a large amount of taxes and policies on their crops and land. The government profited from the crops of the peasants, while they themselves did not profit. Ultimately, the old land-based Chinese empire collapsed, and China was unable to stand up to the Western nations due to a lack of advanced technology and the constant peasant rebellions, weakened the government by damaging the social and political order of China. I'll see you next week on Crash Ing and Empire. Stand cut!